Welcome back to Design 103 CAD Fundamentals. In this video we're going to be taking a look at Lab D, which in your book is going to be drawing 2-2. They call it a center wheel. And so what we're going to be doing here is an orthographic drawing with two views, or some people may call this a multi-view drawing. And one of the important things we need to remember whenever we do an orthographic drawing is that we need to keep our views aligned. So for instance, here I'm drawing a front view that you can see here, and we're going to have a side view, or some people might also call this a right view that you can see right here. Now the important thing when you're doing an orthographic view is that they should always be aligned with one another. Your front view should never be higher or lower vertically than your side view. So for instance on this you can see that I'm lined up here top to top, bottom to bottom, and also center to center. And the other thing you can see is that geometry in the front view matches up to that same geometry in the right view. So you can see this circle here, if I carry this over, it also matches up top to top and bottom to bottom. So when you're drawing an orthographic view, if you ever see anything that doesn't align, that's a hint to you that you may not have drawn it correctly. Things that you see in the front view should be at the correct location in the right view also. So if you see something that does not match there, chances are you've got it incorrect in either your front view or your right view. Now I've already got AutoCAD launched in the background, so I'm going to jump over to AutoCAD and minimize my PDF. And I've already drawn this, so I'm just going to paste it in so we can kind of look at it before we start. And one of the other tips that I want to bring up is some of the mouse characteristics. Now if you remember, we talked about what some of the buttons on the mouse do. The first thing you can do with the left mouse button is obviously you can select tools. So for instance, if I want to select a line command, I can use the left mouse button to select that. And then I can also use the left mouse button to choose where I want those endpoints for those lines to be. Now whenever you're done, you can right-click the mouse, and that'll end your command. You can also, when you're not in a command, you can right-click the mouse, and it should begin your last command or bring up a pop-up menu where you can choose Enter to begin the command. Now one of the other really nice characteristics about the mouse is that you can use it to zoom in and out. And the middle scroll wheel on your mouse is going to be really nice for zooming in and out. So for instance, if I need to zoom in and out on the center of this circle, I can roll the mouse forward and zoom in, or I can scroll backwards on the mouse to zoom out. Another nice function of the mouse scroll wheel is that you can not only use it to zoom in and out, but you can also use it to pan around your drawing. So for instance, if I'm zoomed way in and I need to look at the top of this right view, instead of zooming in and out, zooming out and zooming back in up here, I can stay zoomed in, but if I click and hold the middle scroll wheel, then I can use it to pan up without having to zoom in or out. So if you're zoomed in, you can stay zoomed in and pan around to look at the different areas of your view. So you can roll the mouse forward and backward to zoom in and out, but you can also click and hold it to pan, which is another really nice feature. And finally, if you double click the scroll wheel by clicking it down twice quickly, you'll see that it will zoom out to what's called a zoom extents. Now a zoom extents is where AutoCAD will zoom back just far enough to fit everything you've drawn in one window. So for instance, if I come way up here in the right and draw another line up here somewhere, now when I do a zoom extents, it's going to try and fit all three of these into one window as best it can. So I'll double click my scroll wheel, and you can see the AutoCAD does another zoom extents. In this case, I'm zoomed out further from our original drawing because I have more geometry in my model space that it's trying to fit in there when it does that zoom extents command. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this line up here and come back down to our drawing. And the one final thing I wanted to talk about with the mouse again is how to do some selection commands. Now if you remember, we talked about two different types of selection windows. You've got the blue selection window and the green selection window. And you'll notice if I start at the top left and drag down to the bottom right, I'm going to get a blue selection window. The blue selection window is only going to select things that are totally inside the box. On the opposite, you've got the green selection window. So if I start at the bottom right and go up to the top left, you'll see I get a green selection window with a dashed line around the outside. The green window is called the crossing selection window, and while the blue window selects things that are totally inside the box, the green box will select anything that it touches. So for instance, if I come over to my view over here and I do a blue window, the only thing that's going to be selected here is the two inside circles. the big circle on the outside is not going to be selected because it's not totally inside the blue box. And you can see if I click the second time that it will do that. Now to deselect, I'm just going to hit the escape key on the keyboard. Now on the opposite, if I do a green selection window like that, you can see that the only circle that's totally inside there is the smallest one in the middle. But when you're using a green selection window, it doesn't really matter. It's going to go ahead and select anything that that green box is touching. So in this case, all three of the circles would be selected because I'm using the green window instead of the blue window. And whenever I want to deselect, I can just hit the escape key. So that's just a couple of tips and reminders on how the mouse works. Make sure you're definitely using that zooming in and out capability and both the green and blue selection windows when you're selecting. That'll help make things a lot easier. And finally, I'm going to turn off the navigation cube here by typing navcube, N-A-V-V cube, hitting enter, and choosing off. And I just like that because it's one less thing for me to accidentally click on while I'm drawing. Now if I jump back to our PDF, I'm going to start by drawing these circles right here. And you'll notice that we have a specific location for these circles. The book tells us that this center circle needs to be at the point 3.5, 4.5. Now remember, that's an XY coordinate just like in math class. And so when I jump back to AutoCAD, I'm going to make sure that I use my rectangular grid and snap settings to get this center circle exactly where it needs to be, right at that location of 3.5, 4.5. So I'm going to jump back over to AutoCAD and we're going to start by drawing these circles. And one of the tips when we jump back over that I'm going to really beat on is that you want to make sure when you're drawing these circles that you know whether you're doing a radius or a diameter. Now in this case, all the dimensions they've given us for these circles are going to be diameters, and you can tell that because of this symbol right here. Whenever you see a circle with a line through it, that means you're going to be drawing a diameter, which you remember from math class or geometry. The diameter is the distance all the way across the circle. Now sometimes they may also give you a dimension for a circle as a radius. And you'll know that because instead of putting the circle with the line through it, the diameter symbol, they'll put an R in front of it. And that, remember, is the distance halfway across the circle from here to here. Now there's two separate circle tools in AutoCAD. We have a circle tool that operates on a center radius and also a center diameter. So make sure which one you use is matching up to the dimension they've given you on the drawing. So for instance, on our drawing, all the circle dimensions they've given me are diameters. I've got a diameter of 6, a diameter of 0.25, and a diameter of 4. So in AutoCAD, I'm going to continually be using the center diameter tool because all the dimensions that have been given to me are diameters. Now this is probably the most common mistake that I see people use in AutoCAD, so make sure you're always using the correct tool. If you need center radius or center diameter, make sure you're always choosing the correct one because this is probably the #1 mistake I see people make in AutoCAD is they accidentally use the wrong tool, and the result is that their drawing ends up being either twice as big or half as big as it should be. And eventually they figure it out, but they can't understand why their drawing is the wrong size. Well, usually that's why is that they've chosen the wrong tool here based on the dimensions they've been given. So make sure you're always using the correct circle tool based on your dimensions. Now before we draw any circles, I'm going to go back and set up my rectangular grid and snap settings to match up with something that makes sense based on the drawing we're using here. And looking at this drawing, the smallest increment I really have here is 1/4 of an inch. So when I go in and set my rectangular grid and snap, I'm going to be setting it to increments of 1/4 of an inch this time instead of 1/2 an inch or 1 inch like we've used in the past. So I'm going to go back to AutoCAD. And remember, to activate those grid and snap settings, I'm going to come down here to this row of buttons along the bottom. Here's the button for my snap, and here's the button for my grid. Now I'm going to right-click the snap mode button and go to settings. And if you'll remember from the video last time, we talked about setting this up. So if you would like a better explanation, go back and look at the video for Lab C. And I'm just going to start by using 0.25 as my X and Y snap spacing. And then my grid, I'm going to set at 0.25 and 0.25 also. And I'll leave the major line at every 5 units. Now just to make this show up better on my screen, I'm going to go ahead and change my settings right here just so you guys can see my grid better. Go ahead and leave yours at 0.25, 0.25, but I'm going to adjust mine so you can see my grid lines a little bit better. They don't always show up very nice in the video. So I'm just going to go ahead and adjust this a little bit. You don't need to do this. Okay, now we've got our grid and snap set up. And to start with, I'm going to draw these circles on the left. And if we look, we need to start at the point 3.5, 4.5. So I'm going to jump back to AutoCAD, and I'm going to use my center diameter circle tool. And I'm going to use the scroll wheel on the mouse to zoom in just a little bit. And now, if you want, you can try and locate your mouse right at the point 3.5, 4.5. But I find it's easier just to go ahead and type in what I want. So I'm just going to type in 3.5, tab 4.5, and hit enter. And you'll see that AutoCAD will jump right to that point. And now the final input I have to put in is the diameter. Remember, we're using the center diameter tool, so the point 3.5, 4.5 we've specified is the center, but now we also have to specify the diameter. So based on our drawing, that needs to be a diameter of 0.25, so I'm just going to type in 0.25 and hit enter, and you'll see we get that circle at the correct size. And I'm going to go ahead and use the same tool to create these two outer circles with a diameter of 4 and a diameter of 6, and they should all have a common center point. So make sure that when you start your drawing, you're using that same center point for all three of these circles. So I'm going to go back, choose the center diameter tool again, and this time I'm just going to go over here and click on the middle, now that I know where it's at exactly. So I've specified the center, and now I have to specify the diameter. And the next diameter is going to be 4, so I'll type in 4 and hit enter. And then I'll repeat the process one more time for the large outside circle that has a diameter of 6. So I'll choose my center, input my diameter, and we have our front view finished up already. Now we need to come over and create our right view, and I'm just going to do this with a series of lines. And if we go back to our drawing in the book, we can see that they recommend starting at this bottom point right here, which should be 9.5, 1.5. So I'm going to go back to AutoCAD, and I'm going to activate the line tool, and I'm just going to type in my starting point at 9.5, tab 1.5, and hit enter. And now remember, whatever units you have here should match up what you did in your front view, because we're doing an orthographic multi-view drawing. So I know that I need to go up 6 units because that matches up with the diameter that we drew in our front view. So I'm going to come up straight 6 units and click. And I can tell I've got 6 units. If you look at my readout, it's reading out 6 units, so I'll click there. And now I need to come over to the right some number. Now this I can't tell from my front view because the depth is not visible in the front view that I just completed. So to get this dimension, you will have to look at the drawing in the book, and you'll see at the bottom they have a dimension of 1.5. So I'm going to come over to the right 1.5 inches and click. And then I'll come back down 6 units again, and back to the left to close the rectangle. Now you could also do this with the rectangle command if you want to, but I prefer to do lines for most everything that I draw, but you could also use the rectangle tool for that piece, and also for these two right here. But I'm just going to go back and continue using the line tool. And now in the next place we need to get this line in the correct location. Now if we do a little bit of math, we know that we have a circle with a diameter of 6 here, and a circle with a diameter of 4 on the inside. So if I take 4 away from 6, I get 2 left over. And if I divide that by 2, I know that I have to have an inch here, and I also have to have an inch here. So a lot of people will subtract 4 from 6, and then they come up here 2 units up and start drawing their line. But the problem is that it's not in the right location then, because they've forgotten that since they're doing concentric circles, they have an inch on the top and an inch on the bottom. So make sure that you're using the correct dimensions again. You should have 1 inch here between these two circles and another inch up here. So I'm going to hover over this point after I start my line command, and you'll see this little box pop up, and that's called the O snap. We'll talk about that more later, but I'm just going to hover over that for just a moment, and then I'm going to move straight up, and you'll see a dashed green line pop up, and that's just going to ensure that you're straight in line with this point. So I'm going to come up until I see 1 on my readout, and I'm going to click there because that's going to guarantee that I'm exactly 1 inch from here to here. And now I'll come over to the left, and if I look at my drawing, again, you can see that we need to come over this distance, which is the 0.5 you're seeing right here. So I'm going to come over to the left, 0.5. And now remember, this should be 4, just like it was in my front view. So I'm going to come up 4 units and then go back to the right to close the shape. And then I'll do the exact same thing over here. Since it's a symmetrical part, I know all the dimensions have to be the same. So I'm going to come up 1 inch, go over ½ an inch, up 4, and back to the left 1/2, hit escape. And now the only other thing we have to get in here is the side view of this shaft that goes through the middle of this center wheel. Now this is a little bit tricky because of your snap settings. The middle of this part is going to be right here. And you can see that the way my snap is set up, if I try and center up this shaft based on the center line of the drawing, I'm not going to be able to do it because my snap is set at too large of an increment. If I click down here, well, that's going to be too low, and I can't really click in between there because it snaps back to the middle. So the trick for this is that you need to go back and change your snap from 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch. Since we have 1/4 of an inch dimension here, I need to be able to snap 1/8 of an inch up and 1/8 of an inch down. So I need to set my snap to a finer scale so that I can hit this increment right here that I need. So I'm going to go back to my rectangular snap setting and right click, go to the settings menu, and where I have this set on 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to change that down to 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch. And that's going to give me that finer resolution that I need to get the center for that shaft in there at the correct location. So once I get that changed to 1/8 of an inch, I'll hit OK. And now if I do the line command, you'll see that I have the ability to snap down to 1/8 of an inch, which is going to get that 1/4 inch shaft right where we need it. So I'm going to delete this center line and come back over here, and off the center I'm going to come down 1/8 of an inch and click. And I need to come over 1 inch based on our drawing. You can see that the distance from here to here is specified way up here, and they're calling that out as 1 inch. So I'm going to go over 1 inch, up 1/4 of an inch, and back over 1 inch in AutoCAD. So I'm going to come to the left 1 inch. I'm going to go up 2 notches now with my rectangular snap, which will give me 1/4 of an inch. And then back to the right to close the shape. And then I'll hit spacebar to end the line command. And then I just need to put the small protrusion for the shaft on the end on the other side. So I'll start the line command again, and this one's going to be 1/4 of an inch all the way around. So I'm going to come out 0.25. I'm going to go straight up 0.25, and then back to the left to close the shape. And now that we've got it all drawn, I'm just going to delete these extra 2 that we started with. And now you have a complete orthographic drawing with a front view here and your right view here, and they're both nicely in line with each other. You can see that everything matches up between the 2 views, so any geometry that you see in the front view should match up with what you have in the right view. And not only that, but the center point that they specified in the book is at the correct location, and this point here is also at the correct location. So when you get done, you can go ahead and save that and upload it to Blackboard. So I'm going to go down here and save in the application menu. And remember that you should always use a file name that has your last name and the lab name in it. So I'm going to call this Hamilton Lab D, and I'll hit the save button. And then you can go back and upload it to Blackboard. And if you need tips for uploading to Blackboard, look at the end of last week's video. There's a short how-to there that will show you how to upload your files to Blackboard, but I won't go through that again every week. So if you need to see that, go back to last week's video for Lab C and watch that again, and it'll show you how to upload your file. So that's it for Lab D. Good luck, and we'll see you next time.